So we've been discussing differences between mitzvahs b'adam l'makom and mitzvahs b'adam l'chavero. So tonight we'll focus more on some specific mitzvahs. In fact, we'll compare and contrast two mitzvahs, which happens to be, we read in the beginning of last week's Parashat Vayera about the mitzvah Bikar Cholim. God came down to visit Abraham on his third day of circumcision. And this week's Parashat Chaye Sarah, which talks about the death of Sarah, and it talks about Nicham Avelim. So it talks about the death of Sarah, the eulogy, and what comes along after someone dies. We know there's Nicham Avelim, you comfort the mourners. So there are two mitzvahs under the rubric of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which is a general rule for mitzvahs b'adam l'chavero, and Bikar Cholim and Nicham Avelim fall under that category. So the Rambam raises an interesting question. Let's say you have the mitzvah of Bikar Cholim in front of you, and the mitzvah of Nicham Avelim in front of you. You have a mitzvah to visit the sick, you have a friend or enemy who's sick, and you want to visit him, and you have a mitzvah of Nicham Avelim. Which one should, let's assume you could do both. If you could do one, might be a different question. Let's assume you could do both. Which one do you do? So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Avelis, Yeralali means he doesn't have a source. There's no explicit Gemara, but this is the way I feel. I feel, this is the Rambam's talking, I feel Nicham Avelim takes precedence over Bikar Cholim. Why, you may ask, why does the Rambam think the mitzvah of Nicham Avelim, comforting the mourner, takes precedence over visiting the sick? So the Rambam says, you know why? Because Bikar Cholim is a mitzvah only with the living, with the chai. It's a chesed show with the chayim. But Nicham Avelim is chesed im hachayim v'chesed im hamesim. It's a mitzvah involving the living and a mitzvah involving the dead. Well, we know, Pashtus, we know it's a mitzvah involving the living, that you go ahead and you visit, you do Nicham Avelim, the relatives that are sitting Shiva. But what do you mean it's a mitzvah of a chesed im hamesim? So there's an interesting Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Mem Beis, which says Misha Meis ve'ein lo menachem, and someone dies and has no children, no one to menachem avo. So the Gemara says, the whole discussion, the Gemara says 10 people should go to the person's house, they should get together and do Nicham Avelim. So we see from this Gemara, and the Meiri talks about it, there's a concept of Nicham Avelim for the mace. In other words, there's a comfort for the mace, even though there's no living people there, but there's a concept, I guess, for the neshama, for the soul, but there's a concept of Nicham Avelim for the mace. So we see, that's what the Rambam says. If you're doing both mitzvahs, Nicham Avelim and Bikar Cholim, you should first do Nicham Avelim and then Bikar Cholim, because Nicham Avelim covers Chesed im Achai v'Hameis, while Bikar Cholim is limited to the living. That's fine. One could argue that's a svara, but the Or Sameach and others raise a kasha, a question on the Rambam. There seems to be a Gemara that contradicts what the Rambam's saying. There's a famous Gemara in Sukkah, and Mem Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara says, it talks about Anshe Yushalayim. Well, let's go back a step. We know on the mitzvah of Sukkot, we have the mitzvah of Daled Minim, and we have the mitzvah of Lulav Esrog B'Da'agbe Nafikle.
Should I pause it? Hello? Hey, back. Ben, the shear's not over. Okay, it might be another 15 minutes. Main and Dundern. Make a left. Right? Okay. Bye.
So the Gemara says, once you pick up the Daled Minim, you yotze. That's the mitzvah. However, the Gemara has some Anshe Yushalayim, the Hasidim in Yushalayim, who used to walk around with the Daled Minim all day. So the Gemara has a lesson. So what did they do after they shook the lulav and esrog? It says they had an extended mice in the Zila, and then they went umavakir cholim umenachem avelim. And the Gemara says explicit. What did they do? They did bikar cholim, and then they did nicham avelim. So at first glance, and maybe second and third as well, it seems to go against the Rambam. We see explicit Gemara that first you do bikar cholim, and then you do nicham avelim. So that's the kasha the Or Sameach and others ask on the Rambam. So perhaps we have a simple answer. Because if you look at the Rush writes, he has a different girsa. He quotes the same Minhag Yushalayim, and he quotes the same Gemara, but he says, what did they do? They did nicham avelim v'achakach bikacholam. So maybe it's very simple. So we'll check the Rambam should have the same, if the Rambam has the same girsa as the Rush, and the discussion. The Rambam had a different girsa and everything's fine. The only problem is, if that would be a problem, then my share would be over. But luckily the Rambam keeps our girsa, and then the Rambam himself, when he quotes this Gemara of Anshe Yushalayim, he writes, you should do Bikar, well he writes, that's what they did. He did Bikar Cholim, and then Nicham Avelim. So Hada Kasha Ladukta, the question is still on the Rambam. The Rambam's order of Nicham Avelim first seems to go against an explicit Gemara in Sukkah. So we have to try to answer up the Shitas HaRambam. So we know, we've discussed many times, the Gemara Moikatan, Dav Yudalit Amud Beis. The Gemara talks about the concept of Avelis on Yantif, or should I say, the lack of Avelis on Yantif. That the Gemara tells us the mitzvah of Simchas Yantif supersedes the mitzvah of Avelis. Because the Gemara says Simchas Yantif is a mitzvah derabim, it's a public mitzvah, it's a public affair, meaning the whole Klal Yisrael is celebrating Yantif, but Avelis is a private affair of someone who lost a loved one. And there's a whole discussion, the Machlokes, Rambam and Tosfos, how you learn that Gemara, whether Simchas Yantif today is biblical, and is Avelis Yom Rishon D'Oraisa. So according to the Rambam, they're both biblical. Simchas Yantif today, even without a Beis HaMikdash, is biblical. But Avelis Yom Rishon is biblical, so the mitzvah, the public biblical mitzvah of Simcha overrides the private biblical mitzvah of mourning. And Tosfos is consistent with his view. He says today the mitzvah of Simcha is only D'Rabbanan. So the public rabbinical mitzvah of Simcha, because there's no Beis HaMikdash, overrides the private rabbinical mitzvah of Avelis. So either way, however you learn the Gemara, it's the same result. There is no Avelis on Yantiv. The question the Rishonim asked, which we're not going into tonight, is if you have a public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical mitzvah, who wins? How could you have a case? The last day of Yantif is Yantif Sheni. So Simchas Yantif is only D'Rabbanan according to everyone. It's Yantif Sheni Shagolias, the last day and according to the Svardim, Avelis Yom Rishon is D'Oraisa. So you have a case where you have a private biblical mitzvah versus a public. That's a discussion the Rishonim we've discussed before. But what we see from Al Gemara is that the public mitzvah of Simcha overrides, so there is no Avelis on Yantif. So it's a Machlokas Rishonim. What do you mean, no Avelis on Yantif? Is there Avelis on Shabbos? So it depends. We assume there's no public mourning on Shabbos, but there's Avelis B'tzina. There's private mourning. That's why it's a discussion, different minhagim. Speak to your local Rav for your own stock. But let's say someone who's an Avel, could they go in for a Kiddush? Let's say after Shul, you go in for a shower shidduch. So, speak to for your own stock, but one of the svaras why you can go in is because you can't have any public avelis on Shabbos. If you normally would go into the Kiddush or just whatever on Shabbos, but you're not doing it, so some claim that's an example of public mourning. Everyone knows the reason why you're not walking to the Kiddush now is because you're in avelis. Like you have a similar shaila on the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Chazon. Should you change the Kiddush and that, because again the issue is there's no public mourning on Shabbos. So Shabbos we don't have public mourning, but we have private mourning. So what about Yontif? Is there private mourning on Yontif also? So that's a machlokas rishonim. The Rambam Maimonides says nothing, no avelis at all on Yontif. Not even avelis, but there's no concept of mourning. It cannot coincide with Yontif. And the Rush disagrees and says there's no avelis, but for Hesia in public we do have private. That's a machlokas Rambam and the Rush whether there's avelis but sin or not. Okay, that's a machlokas. But what isn't a machlokas, the Mishnah in Moed Katan Daf Chav Zayin is there's a mitzvah of nicham avelim on Yontif. Certainly Shabbos, but there's a mitzvah of nicham avelim on Shabbos. But the Mishnah writes there's nicham avelim on Yontif. There's a mitzvah that comes, maybe a little different than during the week, but there's a mitzvah of nicham avelim on Yontif. So Bishloma, this is good according to the Rush, who says there is a concept of avelis on Yontif. It's just private, not public. So I can entertain the possibility of nicham avelim, not only the possibility but the reality. But according to the Rambam, what kind of concept? How can it be nicham avelim on Yontif? According to the Rambam, there's no avelis on Yontif. So that's the kasha on the Rambam. How does he deal with the Mishnah? If the Rambam who holds there's no avelis period at all on Yontif, then how could you have a concept of nicham avelim? So Rabbi Selevan wanted to point out that this machlokas is l'shitason, that he wants to point out that the Rambam's opinion fits in with our other issue of the Rambam, because what did we mention before? That the Rambam mentioned, why does nicham avelim take precedence over bikor cholim? Because nicham avelim is chesed ameis v'chesed achai. It's a double chesed, living and dead, while bikor cholim is only for the living. And we said, and we learned out from the Gemara that the concept of nicham avelim even on the mace. So they point out that according to the Rush we understand, but why according to the Rambam? So they point out that the Rush who holds, so according to the Rush you could say it's a normal nicham avelim. It could be a nicham avelim for the meis and the chai. But according to the Rambam, there's no concept of nicham avelim for the chayim, because there's no avelis on Yontif. Elovadem, what is the nicham avelim? When the Mishnah says it's nicham avelim, that's only the chesed and ameis. The concept we discussed, that if someone dies and they have no mourners, you go ahead and you do a nicham avelim in the house. You gather 10. So that's what the Rambam's chiddush is, that on Yontif you have nicham avelim, but it's only a mameis. So now we can understand Pshat in the Rambam. What did we ask? We had a pair in Kasha. The Rambam writes, it appears to me nicham avelim beats out bikor cholim, because nicham avelim is chesed to the living and chesed to the dead. And while bikor cholim is only to the living. The Or Sameach's question, it's against the Gemara in Sukkah, the Anshe Yishrayim first did bikor cholim and then they did nicham avelim. The Rush had the different gears that the Rambam didn't. So the Rav explains there's no kasha. The Gemara is talking about on Yontif. So it's the Rambam with Shitas, and the Rambam agrees on Yontif when there is no nicham avelim for chayim, because there's no avelis at all on Yontif. So then he agrees chesed and achai takes precedence over chesed and ameis. All things being equal, chesed and achai wins. The thing that nicham avelim is a double mitzvah. So therefore, that's what he explains. The Gemara is clearly talking about Chol Hamoed. if they're walking around with the lulavim in the hand, and or yontif, and they're going ahead doing nicham avelim, so that's right. So bika cholam works. So that's what the Gemara. That's how the Rav explains the Rambam. The Rambam on an ordinary day during the week, nicham avelim. Then the Rav explained one more Ushitason on this, that there's another machlokes Rambam and the Rush. They talk about, the question is before Kfura. So we know Avelos begins right after the Stima, so go right after the Kfura. What about the status of Aninus or an Onin from the time of the death? Well, not the person who's dead, he's Patam in Amitzvot, but the Kruvim, the relatives, in between the death and burial, they have a status of Aninus, which means many things, but they're exempt from mitzvahs. But the question is, do the Isuri Avelos begin? When do the Isuri Avelos kick in? So the Rambam sheet is, the Isuri Avelos don't kick in until after the Kfura. And the Ramban and the Rosh sheet is that it kicks in right away. That's the Ramban and Torah Adam. Aninus begins even, the Isra Avelos begins even before the Kfura. So we have a machlokes. The Rambam says there's no Avelos. So the Rambam says there's no Avelos at all on Yontif. That was the Rambam Shita. And he also says that there's no Isuri Avelos before the Kfura. And the Rosh says there is Avelos on Yontif B'Tzina. And the Rosh Hashita is that there is Isuri Avelos before Kfura. So the Rav says these two machlokes are connected. At first glance they seem to be not relevant to one another. One is an issue of Avelos on Yontif, and one is an issue of Avelos Kodem Kfura. So the Rav explained, no, the question is, can you have Nehuge Avelos, can you have the customs of Avelos outside the context of Shiva, outside the context of Avelos, or are they connected? So the Rambam Shita is that the Nehuge Avelos are detailed within the dinam of Shiva. So if you can't have Avelos, so you can't have Nehuge Avelos, you can't separate the two. So in other words, the Rambam who holds on Yontif there's no Avelos at all, so you can't talk about a concept of Nehuge Avelos. And the Rambam also says, Kodem Kfura, you can't take the detail in the Shiva hasn't begun yet. So the Rambam, consistent with his view, the Nehuge Avelos are limited to only during the technical din of Shiva, when you start counting Shiva. And the Rosh Hashita, no. We see they're not connected. The Isuri Avelos even apply outside the context of Shiva. Therefore, even on Yontif, when let's say there's no Avelos, nevertheless he says you still have Avelos B'Tzina. But also he says, but in terms of Kodem Kfura, he also says you have the concept because it's not limited to Shiva. So that's the pshat in the mitzvah in Pshat in the Rambam, that the Nicham Avelim is a double kindness. It's a kindness to the living and to the dead. But Bikar Cholam is only a kindness, only I'm using in parentheses, only a kindness to the living. And therefore on Yontif, when the Rambam says there is no Avelis, so therefore there is no Chesed Amachai, it's only limited to the special halach of Chesed Amameis. So then the Rambam agrees also, when you have a Chesed Amachai versus a Chesed Amameis, so the Chesed Amachai takes place. And again, it's not for tonight, but that's the whole issue also in terms of how sick the person might be. Like, it could be if your visit could keep the person alive, versus Nicham Avelim, then we could discuss maybe he'd say Bikar Cholam. And then there's another issue, which we're not going into tonight either. Let's say you only could do one of them. Which one would win? Do we say the fact that Nicham Avelim comes before Bikar Cholam, does that necessarily mean that if I only could do one, does that mean it wins or not? That's also a discussion in terms of the din of Tadir, etc., which, we'll go into another time.